The mountains do not forget. They hold their secrets close, buried in soil, tangled in roots, whispered by the wind. And among the darkest secrets whispered through Appalachia, one name lingers like a curse: the Whitakers. To some they are myth, to others, they are living proof of what happens when isolation, silence, and hunger collide. But the truth is worse than legend. This is not just a tale of deformity or madness. This is the story of a family feared for generations. Because in the hollow where they lived, the line between human and beast was said to vanish. And where hunger reigned, blood was not always enough to survive. The Appalachian Mountains rise in waves, endless ridges of shadow and stone. To the casual eye, they are beautiful, but for those who dwell deep in their folds, beauty is only a mask. Isolation is the truest master here. For centuries, families vanished into these hills, cut off from towns, schools, churches. Their bloodlines turned inward, marrying only themselves. The Whitakers were one such family born of a valley so remote that strangers could not find it without a guide. And even with one, few dared to enter. The first stories speak of a single cabin, half buried, by the slope of a ridge. Its walls leaned as if the forest itself wanted to crush it back into the earth. Inside lived the first of the Whitakers' brothers and sisters bound by more than blood. Neighbors who lived miles away told of seeing thin figures watching them. From the tree-lined barefoot pale, their eyes wide and unblinking. When they waved, the figures did not wave back. They only stood, staring, before melting into the forest without sound. The Whitakers did not attend church. They did not trade in town, and soon, no one could recall the last time they had seen one of them up close in daylight. But smoke still rose from the cabin, and faint noises, cries, laughter, or perhaps something else carried across the hollow at night. The first whispers of cannibalism began during a harsh winter. The snow came early, blanketing the ridges. In silence, farmers in nearby valleys lost livestock, goats and pigs vanishing as if plucked by invisible hands. At first it was blamed on wolves, but the tracks left in the snow were not wolves. They were bare human feet, small, large, some dragging, some uneven, as if belonging to bodies twisted by birth. And then came the day a hunter followed those tracks to the Whitakers' hollow. He never spoke of what he saw in detail, but his face pale and sunken, eyes wide as if they still held the sight told enough. He said only this: "That ain't right. That ain't people no more." It was then that the Whitakers became more than a family. They became a specter. Children were warned never to wander too far into the woods. Travelers were told to keep to the main roads, no matter how tempting a shortcut might be. And still, now and then, someone disappeared. Inside the cabin, the air was stale, heavy with the smell of damp wood and unwashed bodies. Candles burned too low, barely touching the darkness. The family lived stacked upon one another, brothers, sisters, children, cousins, all tangled in a single bloodline. Their faces carried the evidence: sunken eyes, slack jaws, twisted limbs, and their voices when they spoke at all were garbled, more sound than word. Outsiders called it the language of animals, but to them, it was the only language they had ever known. At the head of the family was an elder, his name never recorded, his body bent like a broken tree. His eyes were said to pierce through the gloom with unnatural brightness. When food was scarce, he was the one who chose goat, pig, deer, or if none could be found, something closer to home. One story tells of a traveler who strayed too close to the hollow in spring. He was last seen by a farmer crossing the ridge with a satchel and a walking stick. His belongings turned up days later, clothes torn and left in the mud, the satchel emptied. His body was never recovered. Yet on certain nights after, when smoke rose from the Whitaker cabin, neighbors swore they could smell something different on the wind. Not venison, not pork, something sweeter, heavier, and the hollow carried it far. To those outside, The Whitakers became monsters, figures of warning, embodiments of taboo. But inside that cabin, what lived was something far more complex. Children clung to their mothers. Brothers fought with brothers. And when hunger struck, when desperation gnawed the marrow of their bones, the choices they made were not of myth. They were choices of survival, twisted into ritual. The fire in their hearth was never allowed to die. Ash piled thick beneath the logs, a reminder of countless nights spent feeding flame. Some say that flame was their altar, that it demanded offerings when the mountains gave nothing, and when the wind roared through the valley, carrying the smell of meat, the town below would shutter its windows, whisper prayers, and pretend not to know. The Whitakers were not gone. They were waiting, and as long as hunger haunted the mountains, they would endure. To speak of the Whitakers was to break a silence older than memory, yet to step into their hollow, to breathe their air. To see their eyes staring from the shadows, that was something no outsider could ever forget. If Chapter 1 is the whisper of their presence, Chapter 2 is the descent into their world, into a cabin where blood ties were chains, and hunger was the only law that mattered. The path to the Whitaker Hollow was narrow, winding like a scar through the dense Appalachian forest. Travelers described it as a place where the light itself seemed to dim, even at midday. The trees grew too close, their branches tangling overhead like skeletal fingers, blotting out the sky. Birds did not sing there, and when the wind moved, it carried with it the faintest echo of something human, low cries, mutterings, or laughter too broken to be natural. At the heart of the hollow stood the cabin, slouched and rotting, a skeleton of timber lashed together with desperation. The roof sagged, patched with animal hides, stretched taut. The windows were blocked, stuffed with rags and wood, sealing the inside in permanent twilight. To cross the threshold was to step into a world where time had not only stopped, but rotted. Inside, the air was thick, cloying, heavy with the stench of unwashed bodies, damp earth, and smoke that never escaped. The floorboards were littered with bones, some animal, some harder to place. A fire burned low in the hearth, its glow crawling across the walls, revealing faces pale as candle wax. The Whitakers were gathered there, huddled close, not in warmth, but in instinct. They spoke in murmurs, their words fractured, a language, guttural and private, forged from generations without schooling, without the need for speech beyond the family itself. Outsiders, hearing it, claimed it sounded less like conversation and more like the chatter of beasts. But within that cabin, those sounds carried all the meaning they needed. There was a girl barely more than 12 rocking back and forth, her hair tangled in mats, her hands clutched tight around a doll she had made from rags. She hummed softly, off-key, a lullaby handed down not from a mother's tenderness, but from necessity, a way to drown out the cries of hunger. In another corner, a boy crouched low, gnawing on something he would not show, something slick and dark clutched in his fists. His jaw worked slow, like an animal protecting its meal. The patriarch, the bent elder, with eyes too bright, watched them all. His silence was a command, and when his head tilted, the family responded. No words were needed. Hunger spoke for him. It was in that silence that the rituals emerged. When food was scarce, they would gather by the fire. The flames licked the shadows into grotesque shapes as they circled. A carcass, sometimes deer, sometimes less recognizable, was laid out upon the boards. The elder would make the first cut, his blade glinting in the orange light. The pieces were divided unevenly, hierarchy etched in hunger. The strongest ate first, the weakest often, the youngest dash last. And yet, despite the horror, there was something in their ritual that echoed in ancient order. Outsiders might call it savagery, but within those walls, it was survival carried down through countless winters. Survival that had blurred into tradition. The stories from those who dared glimpse the hollow tell of screams in the night. Not always screams of fear, sometimes cries of birth, sometimes wails of pain, sometimes sounds so tangled in both that they could not be separated. For in the Whitaker family, lines were not just blurred, they were erased. Brothers became fathers, mothers became sisters, children became parents before they even knew what childhood meant. The family tree did not branch. It circled, growing, inward, folding upon itself like roots choking the trunk they sprang from. Those who encountered the Whitakers spoke of their eyes. Some described them as vacant, others as burning with an intelligence so twisted it no longer resembled humanity. Hunters swore they saw them crouched in the trees, unmoving for hours, watching. Farmers spoke of hearing them outside their barns at night, whispering in broken voices, the sound of bare feet scraping against the earth. And always, when dawn came, something was missing: livestock, tools, or sometimes nothing but silence itself, left heavier than before. One tale comes from a preacher's son, who claimed he wandered too close to the hollow in summer. The woods fell quiet, and he realized too late that he was being watched. Figures slipped between the trees, pale and thin, their movements jerky, unnatural, as if their bodies resisted their own steps. When he turned to run, he heard laughter, high, broken, childlike. It chased him until he burst free into the clearing, his chest heaving, his mind forever scarred. He said he had looked into the face of a boy no older than 10, whose jaw hung loose, whose eyes rolled in 2 directions at once, and who still grinned as if he knew something no human should. Fear spread through the valleys. The Whitakers were no longer just a family. They were a legend of terror, and yet they endured in winter. When the snow sealed the mountains, smoke still rose from their chimney. When spring thawed the earth, footprints appeared in the mud. And when summer brought travelers through the hills, some never left. The townsfolk did not speak openly. To do so was to invite the curse upon yourself, to mark your family for their hunger. But behind closed doors, mothers pulled their children close and whispered, "Do not wander. Do not stray. The Whitakers are waiting." And so, their hollow remained untouched. Not because no one knew, but because everyone knew too well. By now, their hollow was no longer just a place. It was a wound in the heart of Appalachia, and like all wounds, sooner or later, something comes along to reopen it. The Whitakers had hidden for generations, but the mountains never hold their secrets forever. What outsiders stumbled upon in those woods would turn whispers into screams, and silence into legend. The story begins with a search. It was autumn when a farmhand from the nearby valley went missing. He had been last seen carrying a sack of cornmeal up the ridge trail, bound for a cousin's cabin across the hill, but he never arrived. His footprints led toward the hollow and then simply stopped. The townsfolk knew what that meant. They always knew, but admitting it aloud was dangerous. To accuse the Whitakers was to stir them, and no one wanted the hollow stirred. Still, a family needed answers, and so a search party was formed, hesitant, armed, and whispering prayers with every step into the forest. As they neared the hollow, the woods grew still, unnatural. No bird sang, no branch cracked. The silence was a weight that pressed on the men's chests, making every breath a labor. And then they smelled it, thick, sour, unmistakable. Smoke, meat, and rot. The cabin appeared suddenly, as if the forest itself had been hiding it until the last possible moment. Its roof sagged low, its walls patched with skins. A faint orange glow flickered from inside. The men exchanged glances. No one wanted to step closer, but the missing farmhand's family pressed on. Through a gap in the wall, one man dared look inside. What he saw was never spoken aloud in full, but fragments survived in whispers. The fire burned in the hearth, casting shadows across the room. Around it, the Whitakers crouched low, their pale faces gleaming in the flicker. And in the center, upon the boards, lay something no man should ever see. A body, or what remained of it. Limbs stripped, ribs cracked open. The men gagged as the truth struck them. This was no accident of hunger. This was ritual. Then the eyes turned. Every Whitaker, as if tethered by one thought, snapped their gaze toward the gap. The man swore their faces gleamed with something darker than madness. Their mouths opened not in screams, not in words, but in sounds low and broken, a chorus of noises that no human tongue should make. He staggered back, his heart pounding. And that was when the door creaked. The Whitakers moved. The search party fled. They did not speak of bravery. They did not look back. They ran until the trees thinned, until the fields stretched wide again, until the air no longer carried the smell of smoke and flesh. By the time they stumbled into town, their faces were ashen, their words fractured. The missing farmhand was never found, his family buried in empty coffin, and the valley learned, once again, what it already knew: there are places you do not trespass. But fear breeds curiosity, and curiosity breeds trespassers. Over the years, hunters, drifters, and thrill-seekers ventured into the hollow. Some returned, pale, swearing never to speak of what they saw. Others did not return at all. Tales of pale figures stalking the ridges grew louder. Stories of guttural voices in the night spread. Travelers passing through Appalachia whispered of cannibal clans who lived like ghosts in the mountains, feeding not just on what the land provided, but on what wandered too close. And yet, the Whitakers endured. No sheriff's posse ever marched into their hollow. No preacher's sermon dared name them aloud. The mountains protected them, or, perhaps, the mountains punished those who tried. By the mid-20th century, when roads carved deeper into Appalachia, the Whitakers had become more than a family. They were a legend, whispered to children as warnings. But the legend had teeth. Locals swore they still saw them pale, wide-eyed, lurking in the shadows near creek beds and abandoned barns. One trucker claimed he saw them crouched beneath a bridge in the early morning, their bodies twisted, their eyes reflecting like animals. Another swore his rig was followed by barefoot figures through a stretch of road where the forest closed in. He never drove that route again. The truth blurred into myth, and myth bled back into truth. That is the curse of the Whitakers. Were they human? Were they something lesser, something more? Were they victims of isolation, of a bloodline too tightly knotted, or had they crossed into something darker, something chosen? The hollow still stands. The cabin, though sagging and broken, has not fallen. Smoke no longer curls from its chimney. But some say, if you stand close enough, you will hear it. A rustle, a murmur, a voice, low and broken, carried on the wind, and if you listen too long, you may not come back. For the Whitakers were not just feared, they were eternal. A reminder that in the deepest corners of the mountains, civilization has no hold. That hunger, blood, and silence can weave together something monstrous, something unforgettable. The Whitakers are more than a story. They are a warning. Asterisk, the mountains keep their secrets. Trees grow tall, stones erode, rivers shift their course, but the whispers of what happened in the hollows remain, passed from one generation to the next. The Whitakers were more than a family. They became a curse. A living shadow that Appalachia never shook off. And even now, long after their names have faded from census records, their presence clings to the soil, to the cabins, to the silence of the woods when the wind suddenly dies. So ask yourself, what is myth and what is memory? Were the Whitakers victims of their own bloodline, or monsters shaped by hunger and isolation? Perhaps the truth is buried somewhere between the two. And perhaps that is why the legend still terrifies us. Because it is not only a story of them, it is a story of us, of how thin the line is between survival and horror. If you ever find yourself deep in the Appalachians, where the roads vanish and the forest swallows all sound, remember, there are places untouched by time, places where families like the Whitakers carved out their existence in the dark. And in those places, the mountains still remember. The hollow waits, the silence watches, and the Whitakers endure. If this haunting story has gripped you, don't let the shadows end here. Subscribe to this channel for more chilling true histories that the world tried to bury. Hit the like button to keep the fire burning, and share this story with someone who dares to hear it. And in the comments, tell me, do you believe the Whitakers are gone, or do they still walk the ridges of Appalachia today? Because in the end, the most terrifying stories are never just legends.